Good evening. The best part of Israel is that you can speak any language you want, everybody will understand. So I don't really agree or disagree with the previous speakers, one of which is my professor of Bengio, and a very good friend, Margalit Geva. But I'd like to, since Margalit has taken the subject into a very detailed level with intra-Kurdish conflicts, and how the Kurds interact with each other when it comes to their grand strategies, I'd like to start my talk with some small underlining about how the Kurds really view independence. If I'm not wrong, the position of the PUK, the Taliban's party, who is the former Iraqi president, was also argued in this speech. And this party that dominates a significant portion of Iraqi Kurdistan definitely has come out in public arguing that it might not be the right time for Kurdish independence. And due to intra-conflicts between the Kurds, intra-conflicts by political conflicts, many Kurdish groups may have, in the near history, opposed the idea of statehood. But the real essence of Kurdish nationalism is that you cannot really oppose the idea of the Kurds' independence from the four countries that they are scattered around. So when it comes to Iraqi Kurdistan, where two dominant political parties are leading the Kurdish cause, namely Barzani's KDP and Taliban's PUK, it's not that possible even for PUK to come out and say they are against the independence of the region. And in fact, just a few months ago, a Kurdish TV channel had this survey in Iraqi Kurdistan showed that over 75% of the people in the PUK-dominated Suleimania region supports independence. So the idea is very basic. The KDP dominates the government. So whatever happens in that region should be in KDP's responsibility. And the other side is not going to take this responsibility and not going to mess with Iraq or Iran or anybody else for independence, but rather leave it to KDP and keep its mouth closed until the declaration will be made. My focus in this short speech will be on Iraqi Kurdistan and its bid for independence, which is argued to be happening in the very near future. But a few days ago we were discussing with Professor Bengio and with some other friends some brainstorming about independence of Iraqi Kurdistan from Iraq is a solution. As a solution for the crisis Iraq has, or at least it's a method that one can argue. But this argument should also have a counter-argument, which should also come with similar solutions that the first argument actually proposes. The first argument of independence of Kurdistan says that the Kurds within Iraq have been a significant problem and a challenge to the territorial integrity of this country, has been a significant challenge to the security of the country. I'm saying these things from the perspectives of ordinary Iraqis, especially the Shiites today in southern Iraq who argue about Kurdistan. And because of the Kurds, Iraq has gone through major civil wars and major conflicts that included the Iraqi army going into the mountains of northern Iraq, the Kurdistan region, and hunt Kurdish Peshmerga fighters. So the Kurdistan region's perspective and the argument is very simple when it comes to this. If KRG, the Kurdistan regional government in the north, declares independence, so many problems of Iraq will be solved And again, in their words, the future Kurdistan and the future Iraq can be good neighbors. So this is exactly the argument that is now proposed and advocated by two sides. But there should be the other side of the coin. What if the KRG remains in Iraq? What are we going to see in Iraq that preserves its territorial integrity? This question could be answered differently in 2014 May, when ISIS was only in Syria and had only small attacks in Iraq. But after 2014 June, after ISIS expanded into Iraq, and this expansion resulted in substantial changes for the entire country, the answer that we have for this question has significantly changed. In June 2014, when the Iraqi military withdrew from some nearly 40% of the country, and some 30% of these areas were captured by the Islamist organization called ISIS, or Daesh, the Kurds were able to expand their territorial control by 40% overnight. And this included the strategic city of Kirkuk, which is called by the Kurds as the Jerusalem of Kurdistan. It didn't happen with any clashes or whatever with the Iraqi army or with ISIS, with Daesh. In the words of today's Kirkuk governor, Najmuddin Karim, ISIS reached several areas, large areas I mean, probably as large as half of Israel, 2 days after the Iraqi army withdrew. So he recalls this memory with the Iraqi general in Kirkuk when ISIS was marching towards Kirkuk, and he is the governor. He calls the general several times, and the Iraqi army general tells him, "Don't worry, Mr. Governor, we are in the field, we are waiting for ISIS to come, we will protect Kirkuk and stuff," until just a day later, Najmuddin Karim finds out that the general is already in Baghdad. He fled. So, as any country, as any government would do, the central Iraqi government withdrew from all areas it felt itself insecure. This resulted in the expansion of the Kurdistan region, or call it the areas controlled by the Kurds, by 40% overnight, which they fought for it, they lost some parts of it, they regained the other parts, and as of today, they control 98% of the areas they expanded into in June 2014. And they're not going to go back. Means they're not going to withdraw from the areas they captured from ISIS, but indirectly captured from the central Iraqi government. Because in an ideal world, the Kurds are a part of Iraq. And their military, the regional force of Peshmerga, is a part of the Iraqi security forces. So if the Iraqi security forces of Peshmerga captures a land which is not in the boundaries of the Kurdistan regional government, they are required to return this land to their central authority. According to the Iraqi constitution, the Kurdish president Barzani is reporting to the Iraqi prime minister, Haider al-Abadi. All these things are now irrelevant in Iraq. Are now irrelevant in Iraq because ISIS is there. I'm sure most of you have heard about the Iraqi concept of Article 140. Basically, in 2005, Iraq voted on a constitution, a federal constitution, and some areas of 3 provinces were designated as disputed territories between the Kurds and the central Iraqi government. These are Nineveh, Mosul, Kirkuk, Diyala, and Salahuddin. So, residents of these 4 provinces were supposed to go to hold a referendum and decide who they want to belong to. Do they want to belong to Kurdistan or Iraq? And the Article 140 that required this referendum to be held was meant to be implemented in 6 months, and then in 9 months, and it's been 11 years. Was never implemented. So I remember, and by the way, all these disputed territories are controlled by the Kurds now, because they fought it and took it back from ISIS after Iraqi army withdrew. So I remember in June 2014, when the Kurdish Peshmerga went into Kirkuk, the Jerusalem of Kurdistan, there was this graffiti on the wall saying that, "Thank you, ISIS, for implementing Article 140. This was the perception of the Kurds. Kurds were living in their own movie, as I say in Hebrew. They were going after a lost opportunity that was lost several times. As per Ofra Bengio's book, lost at least for 10 times since 1970. The autonomy of the Kurds, not in Kurdistan proper, the 3 provinces that the Kurdistan region is controlling today, but also in Kirkuk, the Jerusalem of Kurdistan, and also in Sinjar, and large parts of the Mosul province, Nineveh. So this problem is there only in northwestern Kirkuk. A few days ago it was revealed that 60,000 Peshmerga fighters are heavily armed and waiting. Not only the Peshmerga fighters, of course, there are also the PKK and other pan-Kurdish organizations who have arrived in Kirkuk to protect it from ISIS expansion, but it's also an indirectly show of muscles to the central Iraqi government. A similar number are in Sinjar, the Yazidi area. And today there was a very senior level meeting in Sinjar where the Pope of the Yazidis were also present, and they declared that the Yazidi people's intention is to remain with the Kurdistan region rather than going back to Iraq. So in the case of an dependent Kurdistan, or in the case of a preserved territorial integrity of Iraq, the US government or whoever is involved in this, including Iraqi politicians, will have to solve this issue. It's huge. Thousands of Kurdish Peshmerga died fighting for these lands. And it contradicts the basic fundamental nature of the Kurdish nationalism to withdraw from these areas, which doesn't only represent an idealistic position, it also represents a pragmatic position. No Kurdish political party can go back to their bases and tell the people that we have withdrawn from Kirkuk. Forget it. It's impossible. The people will not accept this. Or there's no way to explain this. So the disputed territories is one big, huge issue there. If we are going to preserve the unity of Iraq after 2017, namely when Mosul will be recaptured by Iraqi forces and ISIS will be eradicated in that country, we will have to deal with a huge problem that might lead into a civil war. But is this the only problem? No. We're talking about Iraqi Kurds, or the Iraqi Kurdistan region, the government, that is not financially profiting from the financial capacities of the Iraqi government since 2014. Put aside the technical terminology, they don't receive a single penny from the central Iraqi government since 2014. Which effectively made Iraqi Kurds financially independent, and in a move to compensate their loss of the budget from Iraq, Iraqi Kurds have started to sell oil themselves. And we in Israel use Kurdish oil too, which is a known fact. This was illegal until 2014 December, but then the central Iraqi government was unable to fund the war and was unable to send the budget to the Kurds, but the US and the UN required the Kurds and Iraqis to fight together hand in hand, which also required the Iraqi government to pay the Kurds their budget. But since it didn't have the capacity, it signed an agreement with the Kurdistan regional government under the supervision of the UN and the US delegations, allowed the Kurds to sell their own oil. And the Kurds signed this. They are required to send 550,000 barrels of crude oil a day from the oil regions they control without any Iraqi intervention, get the money, and share it with Iraq. It's a win-win, just like between two states. So if we're going to preserve the territorial integrity of Iraq, there's a huge problem, another problem there that we will be required to deal with. If the Kurds will not declare independence, then essentially the world will go back to the Kurds and say, okay, we had given the chance to you to run your own finance since 2014, but now we're going to retrieve this right, and you have to surrender all your oil revenues to the central Iraqi government. No Kurdish political party or no political party on earth will take this responsibility, because it will lose elections, no matter what, or at least lose the popular support, or in the case of Kurds, where the support for political parties are much more ideological than anywhere else, but then the political party who agrees to return all these oil revenues to the central Iraqi government will be attacked by its opposition. So, no matter what, nobody expects the Iraqi Kurdistan government to return the oil revenues. One more thing. The central Iraqi government was technically responsible to protect borders of Iraq. It could not. Okay, that's gone. And the Kurds could not secure those borders in the north initially when ISIS attacked them in August 2014. And they suffered setbacks because the military power of the Kurds was no match for ISIS using American weapons. So the 2005 Constitution and all the agreements with the US government says that the Kurds will receive an adequate share of the weapons that will be provided to the central Iraqi government, but the security of the Kurdish region in the north belongs to Iraq. Didn't happen, so the Kurds were given heavy weapons. By heavy weapons, we mean very heavy weapons. We mean anti-tank missiles. At least 60 anti-tank missiles are in their hands with a lot of ammunition and can protect a lot of borders. More and more, artilleries, armored personnel carriers, and now after some 25 years, the Kurds of Iraq again have a battle-hardened, trained militia force of Peshmerga. With this changed military balance between the Kurds and the central Iraqi government, then one should also deal with the huge risk of clashes between the Kurds and Iraq after the war against ISIS will be finished, which is expected to finish in Iraq, as you see. In the meantime, the Kurds and the central Iraqi government have been in a significant political dispute since 2013, namely when the former Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki mobilized this digital operations command called military force to deter the Kurds to withdraw from several regions. Since then, the Kurds and the Iraqis were in a huge political dispute and unsolved. But until 2014, the Kurds were not really required to engage in any sort of a heavy diplomatic traffic in the world. rather than just having representation offices abroad. But after 2014, the Kurds felt the need for heavy weapons, financial support, diplomatic support, and an equal footing in the U.S. and the international coalition. Sorry. The diplomatic efforts of the Kurds skyrocketed and led to the level that the French president visits Erbil and welcomed by the Kurdish president in a very diplomatic way. And same wise, the Kurdish president visits Paris and is welcomed as a president. So, again, in short, if we are going to keep Iraq as united, we will have to find a solution for this clashing diplomatic campaigns by two governments in Iraq. The Kurds are planning to hold a referendum in Iraqi Kurdistan. Not because it perfectly fits into the Kurdish nationalist ideology, but it also perfectly fits into the pragmatic understanding of Kurdish politics, which the Kurds have seen the need that they need their own independent financial resource, be it oil or something else. They have seen that they will need a battle-hardened and heavily equipped Peshmerga force. Before 2014, there were even talks about abolishing the Peshmerga among the Kurds, but today the militarization of the society is skyrocketing again. And the Kurds have captured the areas that were long disputed with the central Iraqi government, and are now enjoying the ideological rise of nationalist sentiments among the Kurdish people, which empowers every single political party in the region. So, in this pragmatic perspective, the Erbil government, the central Kurdish government, has no other chances but to hold this referendum and find a peaceful way to divorce Iraq in their terminology. But as my focus has been on what will be the case if they don't get a divorce, is that we will need the US government to come back to Iraq and establish a provincial Iraqi government as it did in 2003 to keep these two forces united. Otherwise, this speech did not cover what's happening in Iraq, but I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Shiite militia forces and everything going on in Iraq. Where a very ideologically mobilized and motivated Shiite force with pan-Arab nationalist slogans are marching towards the north. So there will be no chance to stop a possible war between the Kurds and the Iraqis, let alone the other issues I've mentioned. Thank you very much. About the Mosul offensive question. Today it was announced by KRG officials that the offensive will start in the first week of October. Earlier there were offensive on Mosul to recapture Mosul. Earlier there were talks about to start in mid-November or early November. So this is also subject to change whenever the Iraqis will be ready to march towards Mosul, and how strong will the ISIS defense in and around the city. And the Kurds, according to a memorandum of understanding between the Kurdistan Regional Government and the US Department of Defense, Kurdish Peshmerga forces are required to fully participate in the offensive on Mosul. But the level of full participation will be decided by the Kurds and the Iraqis. And for the past 2 months, Iraqis and the Kurds have engaged in negotiations on who will go into Mosul first and who will not go into Mosul. So Mosul is a very important city. It is not only important because Mosul is the second largest city of Iraq, Mosul is the most important, one of the most five important Sunni Arab cities in the Middle East. So if the central Iraqi government fails to go into Mosul, fails to retake it, it loses its Sunni identity and becomes solely a Shiite state, which is one of the features that every Iraqi government fears because of so many reasons. So nobody wants the Kurds to go into Mosul, the city, and the Kurds have been using this as a bargaining chip against the central Iraqi government to make them start negotiating about the independence. So according to the latest news today, the Kurds will not go into city center, but will be 5 kilometers from the city and will fight around it. Regarding Iran, I can't agree more, and the Kurds cannot agree more either, especially in Iraqi Kurdistan. The bigger problem that the Kurds are facing today is Iran, is the expansionism of Iran, are proxies of Iran. Not because Iran is less or more brutal than ISIS. Nobody can be as brutal as Saddam Hussein, so, but the point is, Iran has been made a legitimate actor in the region with the most recent nuclear deal. And the Kurds, alongside Israelis, are now the most suffering from the nuclear deal because it strengthened Iran's transnational capacity of deploying across the Middle East. Some 150,000 heavily armed Shiite militias called as Hashd al-Sha'abi are at the doors of Kurdistan. And not only the KDP Barzani side, but very recently the PKK Talabani side, which is known for better relations with Iran and Iraq, openly said that right after ISIS will be eliminated in Iraq, Shiite militias will attack the Kurds. And one problem is that since Iran and its proxies in the region are made legal, and if they attack Kurdistan, the Kurds fear that there will be no international community to support them. There will be no airstrikes, no weapons support, no ammunition support, and no financial support, while they will be fighting an expansionist Shiite militia or Iranian problem. In the meantime, the Kurds are also complaining a lot about Iran destabilizing the region with many means with many political means and interventions in the region, covert operations, lobbying against the Kurds, and using the central Iraqi government, forcing the central Iraqi government to oppose the Kurdish region. Regarding the question about Al-Bab in Syria, the point that the Kurds know about whatever is happening in northern Syria is not going to be the end game. The end game will happen later in Syria. And the first priority for the Kurds today is to preserve the alliance with the United States, especially in the case of Syrian Kurds, that is a proxy of the PKK. Establishing an alliance with the United States and Western powers mean a lot for the entire Kurdish nation in fortnights. Mostly because aligning with the West is the way that you legitimize yourself and you open up yourself to the international media. The Kurds have received the biggest international media coverage ever in their history, although, as I said, ISIS is no way as brutal as Saddam Hussein. So the Kurds had worse times, but they were not given the attention. So this is one of the outcomes of the open alliance with the United States. So Jarablus is gone, Al-Bab may go, captured by Turks and their proxies. But the Kurdish alliance with the Western world with Western values can bring them back. And this is today's understanding of Kurdish politics in northern Syria. So the Kurds are likely to stay loyal to their alliance with the West. The concentration of Kurdish population in northern Iraq is between 75 to 99% across the region. 75% applies to Arabized regions of Kirkuk, where the Kurdish population even decreased to some 60+% back in 2005. But the de-Arabization process, Arabization is the process that Ofra extensively writes on in her book, is the process that Saddam Hussein and successive Iraqi governments have brought in Arabs from the south to Kurdish areas to increase the Arab population. So the Kurds reversed the situation after 2005. So the population is estimated to have increased by 10%, now around 75%. But there's no single region that the Kurds currently control and claim that where they cannot win a referendum on independence. And they are very cautious about not to go into any non-Kurdish inhabited areas in order not to risk the referendum and democracy of Kurdistan. Democracy of Iraq in Iraqi Kurdistan, I think, was a question asked also in English and in Hebrew. So I'll just say a few words about it before Professor Bengio takes it. But the democracy of Iraqi Kurdistan cannot be ideal at this time. But in comparison to its neighbors, it's a very, very significant progress in the past few years. But I know Ofra will talk about this, but one question that should be asked here is that, can the Kurds establish a democracy while being in a heavy conflict with their central Iraqi government? Or by staying in Iraq? This is the question being discussed in Iraqi Kurdistan today, and so many intellectuals claim that the way for, one of them is your friend Dayan, is the way for the Kurds to establish a true democracy is to declare independence. Thank you again for listening.